As you know, we profiled a lot of Hollywood legends who have served our country, and so we thought we'd do a top 10 Hollywood badass video. Some quick ground rules. These are movie and TV stars who served in the military and saw actual combat. Again, this is a subjective list, just like our top 10 World War II badass video, and so I want to hear from you in the comments section. So let's go. Number 10, Sorrel Booke, better known as Boss Hogg. Yes, that Boss Hogg, the buffoon from the Dukes of Hazzard. Oh, you didn't know that he was a bona fide badass and stud? Well, try this on for size. This is unbelievable. The guy he graduates from Columbia University at 19 and gets a master's at Yale by 21. Sorrel was fluent in 12 languages, 12, including Korean, Russian, and Chinese. You non-believer Wikipedia warriors, go look it up. So what does this linguistic savant do? He enlisted in the Army to serve as a counterintelligence officer during the Korean War. He works on top secret assignments, among other things, and he also interrogates Korean and Chinese prisoners of war. It's amazing. After the Korean War, he goes to Hollywood and becomes a very reliable character actor for 2 decades until his breakthrough role as Boss Hogg. He almost never speaks of his military service or flaunts his genius. When asked about it, he would simply say, "I'm just an ordinary guy from Buffalo." We did a short on him, and it's received more comments of wow than anything we've ever done. He's truly one of the most fascinating people we've come across, and we'll probably do a longer video on him. Boss Hogg, genius and war hero, who knew? Number 9, Second Lieutenant Russ Johnson. Now you know him as Russell Johnson, the beloved professor from Gilligan's Island. Oh, you didn't know about him either? Well, before he was inventing complicated machines from coconuts and bamboo, he was flying 44 missions in the South Pacific as the bombardier of a B-25. And yes, there really was a B-25. On his 44th and final mission, they ditch in the ocean and he breaks both ankles in a hard landing. Russell Johnson treads water for 12 hours, mind you, has 2 broken ankles, before finally being rescued. He earns all sorts of medals for his time in the Pacific, including a Purple Heart, well-deserved. Now here's the amazing part, as if this wasn't amazing enough already. His Gilligan's Island co-star, Dawn Wells, you know her as Mary Ann, said she first learned about his World War II service at his funeral. I mean, can you believe that? They worked together all those years, and by all accounts were very good friends, and she had no idea the guy was a bona fide war hero. Man, they certainly made him different back then. The guy never said a word to anyone. True badass, Russell Johnson. Number 8, Rod Serling. For anybody who's watched The Twilight Zone with any regularity, you know that Rod Serling had some type of wartime experience because so many episodes dealt with the moral complexity and the heartbreak of war, and not just World War II. It's clear that his wartime experience shaped his writing, and it comes across in so many Twilight Zone episodes. Rod was a paratrooper in the 11th Airborne Division and saw intense combat in the Philippines, where he was part of the brutal assault to take back Manila. He was wounded multiple times, but refused medical evacuation. His unit actually suffered 60% losses, and several of his closest friends died right in front of him, emotionally scarring him for life. Rod earned a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star for his heroics. Amazing. Even in his letters home, you could hear the echoes of Twilight Zone. I gotta read this one. It was a gray morning carved out of gray clay and shadowed by fog. He wrote to his parents on his 20th birthday from the Philippines. It was not just a time, it was a mood. The kind of mood that is part of the province of combat and never conveyed vicariously to the human being who has not lived physically with the tension, the violence, the anguish of protracted war. Man, that's amazing stuff. He wrote that on his 20th birthday in a letter home. So number 7, Neville Brand. Now, Neville Brand is one of those great and recognizable character actors that never quite broke through to leading man of star status, but his body of work is pretty extraordinary. When I see Neville, I think of 2 roles in particular. Duke from Stalag 17, which if you see my video on World War II movies, you know how much I love that movie. And as the protagonist in an amazing episode of The Twilight Zone, where he plays opposite a very young George Takei. If you haven't seen that one, check it out. So the internet somehow started a rumor that Neville was the second or fourth most decorated man of World War II, which is not true. But he was a legitimate war hero. He earned a Silver Star for gallantry during the Battle of the Bulge, where he single-handedly took out a German sniper nest and then nearly died just weeks before the war's end when he was riddled with machine gun fire. In the only interview he ever gave about his wartime service, he said, and I'm quoting, "I knew I was dying. It was a lovely feeling, like being half loaded." Now that sounds like something Neville would say. Like a lot of these guys, he suffered from severe PTSD and struggled with alcoholism his entire life. He died relatively young and sadly broke. Heartbreaking stuff. Neville Brand. Number 7, James Garner, one of the great leading men of both TV and film during the second half of the 20th century. One of my all-time favorite actors, a true legend and icon of Hollywood. But did you know that James Garner actually served in both World War II and the Korean War? I think most people know he served in Korea, but at the age of 16, he essentially ran away from home and joined the Merchant Marine towards the end of World War II. Now, for those of you who are going to comment that the Merchant Marine wasn't service, it actually was. In 1988, the U.S. government made all merchant mariners during wartime eligible for veteran benefits. So after World War II, he knocks around aimlessly for a few years, and he decides to join the Army, where he shipped off to Korea as a rifleman in the 5th Regimental Combat Team, part of the 24th Infantry Division. He's in Korea for 14 months and is wounded not once but twice and receives 2 Purple Hearts. Most Americans sadly have forgotten about the Korean War, but it was absolutely brutal fighting, particularly during the severe winter months. He never spoke much of his time in Korea, only to joke on occasion that one of the Purple Hearts was for being shot in the butt. Number 5, Charles Durning. So I'll confess, one of my all-time favorite movies is The Sting. It's probably in my top 10 of all-time movies, a future video perhaps. In it, the Heavy is a private detective, or a private dick as they called him, and it's played by an extraordinary character actor named Charles Durning. Now, he's one of those character actors that seemingly is in everything, but you never know his name. He's always been that guy in that movie or that guy on that TV show. So he's not a household name, but as you're seeing from the pictures on him, you know this guy. But what you didn't know, that he was an off-the-charts badass during World War II. Truly one of the most amazing and remarkable stories. I may have to do a future video on him. There's just too much ground to cover. But in short, he's among the first to land on Omaha Beach, the only guy, in fact, from his landing craft to make it onto the beach alive. Then he proceeds to take out 7 German sniper nests before being shot in both legs and riddled with shrapnel. He spends 6 months in a hospital in London just learning how to walk again before he breaks out. He meets his unit in Belgium and proceeds to get captured in the Malmedy Forest. So for those of you who are familiar with the Malmedy Forest, you know that's where the Malmedy Massacre occurred, where the Germans mowed down 90 unsuspecting American POWs, and Durning was one of 4 that actually escaped and survived. How amazing is that? Can you imagine that? And the survivor's guilt or the PTSD that he must have suffered. He survives the war somehow, and he goes on to an astounding career as a character actor. He never speaks of his wartime experience except for one interview right before his death where he simply said he'll carry with him to the grave the horrors that he saw during the war. Can you imagine that? Just unreal. Charles Durning, wow, what an amazing character. Number 4, okay, here's where it gets really difficult. Of all these men, they're all bona fide badasses and war heroes. Any one of them can be top of the list, really. So we've done several short videos on Eddie Albert because he's just that amazing. You know him most likely as Oliver Wendell Douglas from Green Acres, the leading man opposite Zsa Zsa Gabor, or from his Oscar-winning performance in Roman Holiday, one of my all-time favorite Audrey Hepburn movies. What's particularly amazing about Eddie is that he enlisted in the Navy after having found success in Hollywood, both in TV and film. He wasn't quite yet a superstar like, say, Jimmy Stewart, but he was an established actor well on his way to being a star when he put it on hold to join the Navy. Now, that's pretty amazing. And he served heroically at the Battle of Tarawa, one of the most brutal amphibious assaults in Marine history. Go look it up. It's there that, as captain of a naval landing craft, He's supposed to do a salvage operation and pick up equipment out of the ocean. But he sees hundreds of Marines trapped in the waters off the island being used as a shooting gallery by the Japanese, and disobeys a direct order and rescues them, by some accounts up to 70 Marines. He earned a Bronze Star with the Combat V for his heroics, but truthfully, it should have been a Medal of Honor. I mean, this is Medal of Honor stuff. I really hope he does get a Medal of Honor posthumously. He deserves it. Like most of these guys, Eddie never speaks of his service, except that when someone would call him a hero, he would simply say, "I'm not a hero. The guys who didn't make it back were the heroes." Another greatest generation badass, Eddie Albert. So number 3 is Lee Marvin. It's just so fitting that the man who played tough guy characters and badasses in films and on TV happened to be a legitimate tough guy badass in real life. You just gotta love this. Lee Marvin was a Marine enlisted right after school and participated in a staggering 21 amphibious assaults. You heard me right, 21 throughout the Pacific during World War II. For you skeptics, go look it up. It's 21. It's during the brutal Battle of Saipan that he gets shot multiple times, including severing his sciatic nerve, and he spends the better part of a year laid out in a hospital just learning to walk again. With his distinct baritone voice and his rugged good looks, he breaks into Hollywood and becomes one of the great, hard-boiled tough guys throughout the 60s and 70s, including one of my all-time favorite movies, The Dirty Dozen. Like many of these guys, he suffers from severe PTSD and alcoholism and dies at the age of 63. You know, he's buried at Arlington National Cemetery, not far from the grave of Joe Louis, and his purported last words were, "Once a Marine, always a Marine." You gotta love it. Lee Marvin, number 3. So here's where it gets really tough, 1 and 2. But before I dive into it, some honorable mentions, people that didn't quite make the cut, but it's worth discussing. Guys like Art Carney, for instance, of the Honeymooners fame, who was severely wounded fighting at St. Lo, France. In fact, he walked with a limp the rest of his life. He was another guy who had some success in Hollywood before enlisting. Now that's badass stuff. Betty White and B. Arthur. Bet you didn't know they both served. Betty put her modeling career on hold and joined the American Women's Voluntary Services, where she drove trucks for the duration of the war, while B. Arthur was actually a Marine and also drove trucks during the war. Pretty amazing that 2 of the 4 Golden Girls were badass truck drivers during the war. The king of cool, Steve McQueen. He was a Marine, believe it or not, and though he didn't serve in World War II in Korea, so I'm breaking my rules here, he actually saved the lives of 5 Marines after an amphibious assault exercise went astray off the coast of Greenland. Steve McQueen, badass. Gene Roddenberry of Star Trek fame flew over 60 combat missions in the Pacific. James Doohan, Scotty from Star Trek. Okay, he was a Canadian, so also not eligible, but he actually landed on Juno Beach on D-Day and was wounded in combat. Donald Pleasance, he's English, not eligible for the list, but he flew over 40 missions and was actually a POW in a Luftwaffe prison camp. Ironic given that he starred in The Great Escape. Can't make this stuff up. There's lots more. I know we're not covering everybody. Leave your thoughts in the comments. So number 2 and 1 are sort of interchangeable in my book, similar to my biggest badass video where I said that John Basilone and Audie Murphy were interchangeable. Speaking of Audie, you'll notice he's conspicuously absent from this list. It's not a slight. I love Audie too. It's just that I don't consider him a true actor in the sense that he parlayed his war heroics and his fame into an acting career. Meaning, were it not for the war, he would never have been an actor. The rest of these folks were actors in spite of the war careers. I just don't view Audie as an actor. He's a war hero, yes, not an actor. I know many of you will disagree, and that's fine. He was a mega badass, no doubt about it, but I'm not ranking him on this list. But number 2 is Charles Bronson. If ever a man's public and private image married up perfectly together, it was Charles Bronson. He's one of the enduring Hollywood icons from that era because he so perfectly and naturally played the stoic, tough guy, hard-boiled heroes and sometimes anti-heroes. And it turns out he wasn't acting. He was that guy. Charles grew up dirt poor in coal mining country, Pennsylvania, and famously noted that when he joined the Army Air Force in 1943, it was the first time he had ever eaten 3 meals a day. That's poverty. He served as a gunner on a B-29 Superfortress and flew 25 missions throughout the Pacific, including over Japan, which was dangerous. It was during his last mission that he was shot up badly, and though bleeding profusely, he refused medical attention so that he could continue to man the gun for the duration of the flight. Now that's badass stuff. He nearly bled to death and earned a Purple Heart. Like all these guys, he almost never spoke about it. Now, we've done several videos on Charles, and they're the most popular videos we have. People just have a visceral connection to the man because he's so authentic and in some ways relatable. What you see is what you get. A stoic, loyal, unwavering badass, something you just can't fake. There's legions of stories of him sticking up for others, helping them out, fellow veterans while on movie sets. The guy was just a real McCoy, and to this day, people just love him. So number one, to me, the ultimate World War II badass has to be Jimmy Stewart. I've done a whole video of Jimmy and many shorts, so this should come as no surprise. It's one of our most popular videos, in fact, link in the description box. Do please check it out if you really want to know how extraordinary Jimmy Stewart was during the war. To boil it down, what's so amazing about Jimmy Stewart is that he was already a bona fide superstar when he enlisted in the Army Air Force. Not a star, he was a superstar. In fact, he had just won the Academy Award for his role in the movie Philadelphia when he gave it all up to serve his country. What's also remarkable is that he insisted on seeing actual combat. He refused those Hollywood show pony jobs, and it turns out he was an elite pilot in the 8th Air Force, flying some of the most dangerous and difficult bombing missions of the war. By all accounts, Jimmy wasn't a good pilot, he was a great pilot and one of the most important leaders of the 8th Air Force throughout the war. Look, I could go on and on about Jimmy. In fact, I do in my other video. But suffice to say, like all these other guys, he suffered severe PTSD. But unlike most of the veterans, the American public could see it play out in real time during the movie It's a Wonderful Life. In several scenes, in fact, most notably the famous bar scene where he's begging God for guidance, he's literally having a nervous breakdown on camera. He rose to the ranks of Brigadier General in the Air Force and even flew a combat mission in Vietnam in 1966. That's badass stuff. Look, Jimmy is not only one of the all-time great movie stars in history, he's one of the great combat bomber pilots in history. And he did it while already a legitimate superstar. This is just amazing. God bless Jimmy, an extraordinary American. So that's my list. Tell me what you think. Leave your list in the comments. Hit like and subscribe. Till next time, I'm Nick Ragone.